Veteran of the war with a disability, Jake Sully leads a routine existence in the United States. He spends his days lamenting his decisions, picking fights in bars, and thinking back on his former glories. He had no idea, however, that his world was about to collapse. One day, he is approached by some authorities who inform him that his twin brother Tom has been killed. Even though Jake is crushed by the news, the authorities want to engage him to finish the unfinished business left by his brother. It comes out that Tom had intended to look into a recently discovered planet named Pandora, which supposedly has life similar to that on Earth. After giving the idea some thought, Jake accepts straight immediately when the authorities say that he would be compensated in millions. He is then placed into a 6-year cryogenic hibernation to prepare for the mission. When he wakes up, he is traveling to Pandora with a number of other people. Granted that Jake and his sister had a perfect genetic match, he was given this unique opportunity. In the next scene, a shuttle is used to take Jake and the rest of the team to Pandora. The planet's atmosphere is too poisonous for humans to live. Only 20 seconds of exposure would kill them in 4 minutes. Thus, everyone is instructed to wear full-face respirators. Jake walks to a military briefing where Colonel Miles Quaritch is speaking to the assembled troops and some accompanying citizens as soon as they arrive on the enigmatic planet. He tells them about the Na'vi, the natives of Pandora, and warns them that they must obey the local rules if they wish to live. Later, while Jake is in a research center, Norm Spellman, a biologist, introduces himself. She allows him to see his programmed avatar for the first time. It is then told that a human may blend in on the planet of Pandora and behave like a Na'vi if they link to their avatar. A genetically altered Na'vi hybrid. The program's scientific head, Dr. Grace Augustine, then wakes in a specially built pod that links her to her avatar as Jake and Norm enter the science department. She seems irate and rushes out of the room as Norm attempts to introduce her to Jake. Grace then approaches Parker Selfridge, a member of the Resources Development Administration, RDA, and the base commander. All military and civilian personnel stationed in the colony are managed by a firm called RDA. She tries to persuade Parker that Jake is worthless since he doesn't have functional legs and isn't a scientist. In response, Park claims that Jake is the only person who has the same DNA as his brother Tom, which are crucial for activating his avatar. Jake and Norm are linked to their avatars in the lab the next morning. Soon later, Jake's virtual self wakes in a different space. Unexpectedly, he can now walk and move his legs, something he hasn't done in years. He hurries to the recreation area, where many other avatars are playing sports and having a good time, disregarding his doctor's instructions since he is overjoyed. The bond is destroyed later, while Jake's avatar is sleeping, and he wakes in his human form. He then introduces himself to the Colonel and starts talking. When Jake questions the Colonel about the real reason they are on this planet, the Colonel eventually spills the beans. Unobtainium, an incredibly rare kind of rock that is valued at billions of dollars on Earth, is reportedly found on Pandora. The Na'vi people live in a hamlet where the greatest and biggest unobtainium rocks may be discovered. Jake will have to find a method to persuade them to leave, however, since they won't want humans encroaching on their territory. Jake has 3 months to flawlessly fit in with the Na'vi people and convince them to seek for a new home, the Colonel says. Jake will get new legs if the mission is a success. A military squad will be sent in at the end of the 3 months if the Na'vi people continue to refuse to leave, which would probably result in the extinction of the whole species. The next day, Grace, Norm, and others fly above Pandora's surface as Jake interacts with his avatar. Soon after landing, they start gathering samples of the local vegetation. But Jake gets lost and wanders into a field of flowers since he is unfamiliar with the strange surroundings. Jake is suddenly separated from his friends when a weird animal, a thanator that resembles a panther, comes from behind and hunts him. Fortunately, he escapes by jumping under a waterfall when the Thanator is roaring over him. After some time of searching for him, Jake's group decides to go home as it becomes dark. Jake may be seen making a spear out of a long stick at night after having lost all of his weapons. A female Na'vi is keeping watch on him in the meanwhile. A weird, shimmering thing falls on her bow as she is about to kill him with an arrow, but she stops herself. Jake was attacked by a pack of viper wolves at the same moment. This time, it seems as if he has met his end, but strangely, the female Na'vi comes to his rescue and drives the wolves away. She, however, is not happy with Jake and tells him to go back to his proper position. Jake then begins to follow her as she gets ready to leave. Additionally, he asks her to teach him how to survive. The Na'vi first declines to assist him, but as many of the enigmatic luminous things from earlier land on Jake's body, she is moved and brings him to a Matakayan. Additionally, she identifies herself as Neytiri. However, as soon as they get at the specified location, the Na'vi populace becomes hostile. Tay, Neytiri's betrothed and the heir apparent, particularly wants the hybrid human put to death right now. Neytiri, who is also the tribe's king and queen, intervenes to stop them and takes Jake to her parents. Jake informs them that he is a warrior and that his objective is to get familiar with their customs and culture. The queen pricked his chest and licked his blood when she heard this. After determining that he possesses a pure soul, she invites Neytiri to serve as his teacher and guide. Jake is led to his bed, which envelops him like a cocoon after a traditional gathering. Human Jake gets roused from the room as he nods off. He tells Grace and the other scientists about his surreal encounter in the morning. But the colonel cautions him once again that he has only 3 months to do his assignment. The human Jake is next shown recording a video journal of his daily activities in which he describes his experiences. He mentions how Neytiri and his avatar are hard at work in their training. She once requests that he choose a scoun, a peculiar-looking animal, as his ride. He is first dubious about the concept, but after much persuasion, he picks one and connects his neural network to its antenna. After that, he gains riding experience and learns to control the horse. The Navy's massive home tree and a sizable unobtainium deposit are later disclosed to the Colonel and Parker by human Jake. Jake asks to speak with the Na'vi and persuade them to go while the Colonel sees a chance to cut down the tree. Meanwhile, Grace discovers that Jake is being used as a pawn, so she banishes him to the Hallelujah Mountains, a remote region of vast, floating islands revered by the Na'vi. It turns out that she is just visiting Pandora for scientific purposes and has no interest in the unobtainium rocks. A Toruk, a colorful flying mountain creature who dislikes everything that flies, suddenly pursues Jake and Neytiri one day while they are flying on their scouns. Fortunately, they are able to get away, and Neytiri shows Jake the remnants of a past Toruk when they reach the home tree. She says that her great-grandfather was the last person to ride a Toruk, and he did it to unite the 5 Na'vi tribes at a trying time. Neytiri adds that no one has ever tried to ride a Toruk in decades. The Na'vi tribe begins to embrace Jake as one of their own as the days go by, and they even throw a celebration in his honor. After the ritual, Neytiri leads him to a place of prayer where they link with a tree using the nerve endings at the tips of their long hair. He is now free to choose a lady as his wife, according to Neytiri. After giving it some thought, Jake says he wants to wed her. Despite her obvious shock, Neytiri agrees to the proposal and the kiss. The new pair then spends the rest of the evening together beneath the tree as Jake awakens in the lab. Neytiri wakes up in the morning to the sound of fallen trees and sees several bulldozers devastate the area. As they are being assaulted, she becomes aware of it and makes every effort to get Jake to safety. When Jake eventually recovers, he jumps aboard one of the bulldozers and makes an attempt to stop it. In the meanwhile, Jake is preparing to join with his avatar at their distant location. He breaks the camera system when it stops working, forcing the troops to open fire in response. Thankfully, Jake is able to flee and make it to the farmhouse. The colonel back at the base views the security footage and recognizes Jake as the avatar who tried to obstruct their mission. He then storms inside the space, searching for Jake and Grace as the bulldozers keep tearing down the Omatakea's holy site. Under the house tree, the Navis gather and decide to fight the intruders. Jake and Grace object to it and try to dissuade them from doing it. Jake is engaged to Neytiri, but the warrior Tsuti attempts to murder him after learning that they are inseparable. As things become heated, Jake and Grace's avatars pass out as the colonel unexpectedly breaks the connection between them and their human selves. A furious Grace confronts the RDA and military leaders in the next scene and reveals that the Na'vi have access to a network constructed of Pandora's trees that has more neural connections than the human brain. The Navis will never leave their home, the home tree, according to her and Jake. After learning this, the colonel makes the decision to attack the farm and use gas bombs to force the Navis out. Jake, who is alarmed, asks Parker, the base commander, for permission to use his avatar so that he might persuade the Navis to leave. Parker complies, but he reminds Jake that he only has 1 hour to do his task. When he returns to the Navis, he tells them about the human invasion and acknowledges that he is one of the invaders. Hearing this, Neytiri confronts Jake for breaching her confidence. The other Navis, who are as saddened, kidnap Jake and Grace and hold them as captives. They then get ready to battle the humans who have appeared in several flying ships after that. The conflict then starts. The Navis put out their best effort, but the heavy armament of the humans is too much for their bows and arrows to handle. Unfortunately, the home tree is ultimately knocked down after multiple explosions, which results in the deaths of several Navis. The Queen suddenly stops by the humans who are being held hostage during the commotion and frees them. Then she pleads with them to help rescue their tribe. Jake approaches Neytiri right away and unsuccessfully attempts to comfort her. Neytiri's father is gravely wounded during the attack, and as he is dying, he commands her to take his holy bow and lead his people. Jake and Grace abruptly revert to human form, and they are then arrested for treason. Norm is also detained for trying to prevent soldiers from turning off their avatar forms. The surviving Na'vi, meanwhile, assemble at the Tree of Souls. Jake and his companions are covertly released by their team pilot, Trudy, back at the base. After that, they take off aboard her spaceship in an effort to contact the Navis. Unfortunately, the wicked colonel sees them along the route and fires at the spaceship. Grace is severely hurt, and it seems as if she may pass out. The gang eventually arrives to the floating mountains, where Jake enters a pod and emerges as his avatar. He then takes the daring decision to summon his scout and go on a journey to find the Toruk, despite being aware that the Navis would not welcome him. Though his plan is straightforward, it might easily lead to his demise. Jake then carefully descends toward the perilous Toruk and gets upon its back. Then, we see him riding the Toruk to the Tree of Souls, while participating in an Omatakean ceremony. All the Navis are shocked by this, and they eventually give him a respectful greeting when he returns. The warrior Tsuti then agrees to help Jake fight the human army when Jake requests him for help. Jake makes an effort to rescue his ailing buddy Grace with the assistance of the Queen now that the Navis are on his side. All of their attempts, however, are futile since Grace eventually dies from her wounds. Due to Jake's ensuing rage, the Navis band together to drive the humans out of their territory. They reach their enemy clans at day's end and collect around 2,000 more Navis. The colonel, meantime, turns his focus to the Tree of Souls after seeing the Navis in great numbers. He gives the command, and his soldiers advance in that direction. To his amazement, though, the Navis also appear, both on the ground and in the air. Sute and other warriors are prepared to give their lives in exchange for their country, while Jake is soaring in the sky on his fabled Toruk. Soon, a bloody conflict breaks out, and both sides begin to accumulate corpses. However, this time the human artillery slowly starts to fail due to the Scounds. Jake is being followed and fired at by the Colonel's Dragonfly spacecraft throughout all of this. Thankfully, Trudy gets there in time and fires at the Colonel, giving Jake enough time to get away. Sute is also killed in an explosion, while Neytiri's ship is shot down and she dies. Neytiri sees the destruction from below and becomes alarmed. A huge bomb ship is now sailing for the Tree of Souls. The troops seem to be winning, but suddenly a battalion of Titanothers, Pandora's massively armored dinosaur-like creatures, emerge through what's left of the surrounding forest and begin assaulting the humans. Neytiri, who is overjoyed, rejoins the battle with a number of Pandora's species following her. Unexpectedly, when a Thanator emerges close, it bends down to her. The military's ground soldiers then disperse in disarray as Jake lifts his Toruk to meet the bomb ship. After that, he bombards the spacecraft with explosives, causing it to crash far from the Tree of Souls. Jake fires explosives at the Colonel's ship as well, but the Colonel escapes in an EMP suit before the spacecraft catches fire and explodes. Sadly, the Colonel finds himself in Grace's improvised camp. The Thanator that Neytiri had associated with assaults him as he attempts to switch off Jake's avatar pod. Surprisingly, he uses his suit to kill it, trapping Neytiri below in the process. Jake shows up on the scene in his avatar just in time to save the Colonel from killing her. The two then engage in back-and-forth combat, with the Colonel ultimately winning. The Colonel is ready to kill Jake when Neytiri stands up and fires an arrow at him, impaling him in the chest. She immediately releases a second arrow, instantly killing the Colonel. He had harmed Jake's pod sufficiently before he passed away, however. As a result, human Jake is still awake, but is having trouble breathing and putting on a mask. Fortunately, Neytiri appears and helps him recover his mask. She then cradles Jake the human and receives her first close-up view of his actual physique. In the last scene, Jake signs off of his video log and informs the audience that his avatar will now permanently house his consciousness. In a rite that marks the end of the movie, Jake wakes in his avatar form as Neytiri keeps vigil over him.